His hand touched her face with a tenderness that belied 20 years of fierce solitude. Amber eyes locked onto hers like invisible chains, and the air between them grew too thick to breathe. All around, the entire pack watched in sepulchral silence, witnessing the impossible, the monster they feared kneeling before the girl they had cast aside, and when he parted his lips, the truth that would emerge from those lips would shatter everything they knew. Before we dive deeper into this story, share your thoughts below with a rating from 1 to 10, and tell us where you're tuning in from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. The pre-dawn chill cut through her skin like invisible blades. Willow awoke before the first ray of sun pierced the cracks of the barn where she had slept for 3 years, ever since the fever took her mother and left her completely alone in the world. The packed dirt floor held the night's moisture, and she felt her bones protest as she rose from the mound of straw that served as her bed. No one in the pack cared about her comfort, no one ever had. She walked to the water bucket in the corner and washed her face with mechanical movements, observing her trembling reflection in the dark surface. Brown eyes, tangled black hair, cheekbones too prominent from the hunger that never quite left. Willow was 19, but sometimes she felt she carried centuries on her back. The pack tolerated her because they needed someone for the tasks no one else wanted to do. Cleaning, carrying, serving in silence. She was useful as long as she remained invisible. The sound of approaching footsteps made her heart quicken. Heavy, determined, multiple steps. This wasn't normal. No one came to the barn at this hour. There were no urgent tasks before dawn. Willow wiped her hands on her worn dress and stood still, waiting. The door creaked open, and the silhouette of 3 men blocked the entrance. She recognized Ethan, the right-hand man of the current pack leader. Beside him, 2 warriors she only saw from afar, always shadowing the alpha like obedient figures. Ethan's face didn't bear the usual expression of disdain. There was something different there, something she couldn't decipher. It looked almost like guilt. "Get dressed," he ordered, his voice rough, cutting the silence. "The council wants you." Willow felt her stomach sink. The council never summoned her. She didn't exist for those power meetings, for the decisions that shaped the pack's destiny. She was merely a shadow who served coffee and vanished before anyone noticed her presence. Why? The question escaped before she could hold it back. Ethan averted his gaze. The other 2 remained in stony silence. Just come. She had no choice. She put on the only presentable outfit she owned, a faded grey dress that had belonged to her mother, and followed the 3 men down the dirt path leading to the centre of the settlement. The sky was beginning to lighten at the edges, painting the horizon in greyish tones that matched the weight in her chest. Willow noticed that other pack members were already awake, watching her pass with expressions that varied between curiosity and something darker. Pity, perhaps, or relief. The Grand Hall stood in the heart of the settlement, a stone and dark wood structure that had witnessed generations of decisions, judgments, and rituals. Willow had never entered through the main door. She had always used the back entrance reserved for servants. But that morning, Ethan led her, directly up the stone steps through the heavy oak doors, into the torchlit interior where flames flickered on the walls. The council was gathered in a semicircle, 5 men and 2 women all dressed in the pack's colours, all with sombre expressions. In the centre, occupying the raised chair that symbolised absolute authority, sat Sterling Thorne, the Alpha, the man who had governed with an iron fist since Willow was a child. Ever since the old king had disappeared under circumstances no one dared question aloud. Sterling Thorne was 50, with greying hair shaved close to his skull, eyes of such a pale blue they seemed devoid of warmth. When his gaze met hers, Willow felt a shiver run down her spine. There was satisfaction there, a satisfaction that promised nothing good. Willow. He pronounced her name as if he savoured each syllable. The daughter of the healer who died indebted to the pack, the orphan we fed and sheltered out of pure generosity. She swallowed the retort burning in her throat. Generosity. 3 years sleeping in a barn, eating scraps, working from dawn till dusk. That was their generosity. Do you know why you're here? No, sir, Sterling Thorne smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The pack has faced a threat for 2 decades, a creature that inhabits Blackwood Forest, a monster that tears apart anyone who dares cross its domain. We've lost hunters, warriors, reckless youths who didn't believe the tales. He paused, a calculated move. They say the creature is all that remains of the old king, that he transformed into something savage, something that can no longer be called a man. Willow knew the stories. Everyone in the pack knew them. The Alpha King who had gone mad, who had become a tyrant, who had been deposed by his own people before fleeing to the forest and becoming lost in his own curse. Mothers used that tale to scare disobedient children. Elders whispered about howls that echoed on moonless nights. No one entered Blackwood Forest. No one. The council has decided it's time to make peace with the beast, Sterling Thorne continued, his voice smooth as poison. And for that, we need an offering. A sacrifice that will appease the monster's fury and bring peace to our borders. Willow's blood ran cold in her veins. She understood before the words were spoken. She understood. By the gleam in the Alpha's eyes, by the guilt she'd seen on Ethan's face, by the looks from the pack when she'd passed. It wasn't a summons. It was a sentence. You, Sterling Thorne declared, each word a nail in her coffin. You will be our offering. The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. Willow opened her mouth to protest, to scream, to plead, but no sound emerged. Around her, the council members maintained stone faces. No one would protest. No one would defend her. She was the perfect choice. No family, no allies, no value beyond manual. Labor. A life that could be discarded without anyone missing it. The handover will be at dawn, Sterling Thorne added, rising from his chair. You will be led to the edge of Blackwood Forest and left there. What happens after that is in the hands of fate. He passed her without a second glance, as if he had already erased her from his existence. The other council members followed, one by one, until Willow stood alone in the centre of the grand hall, surrounded only by torches that cast dancing shadows on the walls. The silence was absolute, the silence of one already dead. Ethan remained at the entrance, waiting. When she finally managed to make her legs move, he led her back to the barn with the same impersonal efficiency as before. He offered no words of comfort, offered nothing. He simply locked the door from the outside, ensuring she wouldn't try to escape. Willow sat on the straw and stared into nothingness. Fear was a living thing in her chest, a wild animal clawing at her ribs. She was going to die. She was going to be torn apart by a creature that hadn't even been real to her until that moment. And no one cared. No one ever had. The tears came silently streaming down her face without her making an effort to hold them back. She cried for the mother she had lost, for the life she had never had, for the future that was now being ripped away from her. She cried until no more tears remained, until dawn began to paint the sky through the cracks in the barn. When Ethan returned to fetch her, Willow had dried her face and lifted her chin. If she was going to die, she wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her beg. She wouldn't give Sterling Thorne the memory of a broken girl. She would carry her dignity to her last breath, even if it was the only thing she had left. The walk to Blackwood Forest was made in a silent procession. The entire pack seemed to have awakened to witness the sacrifice, forming 2 lines along the dirt path leading to the edge of the woods. Willow walked between them with steady steps, ignoring the stares, ignoring the whispers. Some averted their eyes when she passed, others maintained stone expressions. No one offered help. No one dared question. The forest appeared before her like a living wall. Ancient trees, gnarled trunks, canopies so dense they blocked the rising sun's light. The air there was different, heavier, laden with moisture and something she couldn't name. It seemed the very woods breathed, watching, waiting. Sterling Thorn made a gesture, and the warriors escorting her stopped. Willow was gently nudged forward until her feet touched the invisible line separating the pack's territory from that forbidden place. "May your death bring peace," Sterling Thorn declared, the words sounding like an empty blessing. And then, without ceremony, without farewell, the pack began to recede. Willow stood there, alone, looking into the darkness between the trees. The silence was absolute. The whole world seemed to hold its breath. She took the first step into the forest, and the darkness swallowed her. The light disappeared with every step Willow took deeper into the forest. The tree canopies formed an impenetrable ceiling, turning day into permanent twilight. The ground was soft beneath her feet, covered in decaying leaves and moss that muffled every sound. She moved forward without a definite direction, simply moving away from the edge, from the pack, from everything. She knew. The silence was too dense. There were no birds singing, no small animals rustling among the bushes. The forest seemed dead, or perhaps just waiting. Willow felt the hairs on her neck bristling, the constant feeling of being watched. But when she looked around, she saw only trees and shadows. Hours passed without her being able to measure the time. The light filtered by the canopies didn't change, maintaining that greyish tone that confused her senses. Willow walked because to stop meant to think, and to think meant to accept that she was lost in a place from which no one had ever returned. Her stomach rumbled with hunger, her throat burned with thirst, but she continued. It was when the sun should have been at its highest point that she noticed movement. It wasn't something she saw directly, more an impression at the periphery of her vision. A shadow moving between the trunks, too large to be any animal she knew. Willow stopped, her heart pounding in her chest. The fear she'd been containing since dawn exploded through her body like an icy wave. The creature emerged from the shadows with deliberate slowness. It was a wolf, but unlike any wolf she had ever seen. Enormous, with fur black as the darkest night. Eyes of golden amber that glowed even in the gloom. Its muscles rippled beneath its coat as it moved, circling her with calculated, soundless steps. There was something unsettling in those eyes, something that didn't fit an animal form. Intelligence, awareness, something almost human. Willow expected the attack, expected teeth tearing her flesh, the pain that would precede the end. But the creature didn't advance, it just kept circling, watching, as if evaluating her. The silence between them was charged with a tension she didn't understand. Why wasn't it killing her? Why the hesitation? The wolf stopped a few feet away, its muzzle raised as if scenting something beyond the obvious. Willow didn't move, barely dared to breathe. Its eyes met hers, and in that instant she felt something strange. It wasn't fear, though fear was still there. It was something else, deeper, as if something within her recognized something within him. "Are you going to kill me?" The question escaped in a hoarse whisper. The creature tilted its head in an almost human way. It didn't answer, obviously. It was a wolf. But something in the way it looked at her made Willow doubt that certainty. That wasn't animal behavior. It was as if it were thinking. The moment broke when the wolf turned and began to move away among the trees. Willow stood still, confused, not knowing what to do. Should she flee? To where? The forest was a labyrinth of identical shadows. Should she follow him? The idea seemed crazy, but no crazier than anything else that had happened that day. The creature stopped a few yards away and looked back, waiting. Willow understood the silent message. He wanted her to follow him. Against all logic, against every survival instinct, she began to walk behind him. The wolf led her along invisible trails, navigating around areas where vegetation was densest. Avoiding uneven terrain that might make her stumble, there was care in his guidance, an awareness of her human limitations that made no sense at all. Willow followed him in silence, observing every movement, every decision. The creature didn't behave like a wild beast. It behaved like a guide. When they finally stopped, the sun should have been setting, though the light remained the same under the canopies. They were in a small clearing, surrounded by moss-covered rocks. A stream flowed softly nearby, its crystalline water shimmering like silver. Willow felt her thirst burn with renewed urgency. The wolf stood at the edge of the clearing while she approached the stream. Its paws moved restlessly as she knelt to drink, as if ready to intervene if anything happened. Willow drank until her stomach protested, then sat on a stone and watched the creature that should have killed her hours ago. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, even knowing she wouldn't get an answer. The wolf lay down at the entrance to the clearing, blocking the only visible exit. But its posture wasn't threatening. It was protective, like a guardian watching while others rested. Willow leaned her back against a rock and let exhaustion take hold of her body. She shouldn't sleep, shouldn't lower her guard, but exhaustion was stronger than fear. Her eyes closed against her will, and the last thing she saw were those amber eyes watching her in the gloom. She woke to the sound of rustling leaves. The light remained the same, making it impossible to tell how much time had passed. The wolf was no longer at the entrance to the clearing, but Willow could feel his presence nearby, a constant awareness that didn't completely abandon her. She stood up, stretched her aching muscles, and drank more water from the stream. Her situation hadn't changed. She was still lost in a deadly forest, but something in her chest was different. The blind panic of the previous day had given way to cautious curiosity. The creature hadn't killed her. The creature was protecting her. There was something wrong with the stories they told about this place. The wolf reappeared carrying something in its mouth. Willow tensed for an instant, but relaxed when she realized it was just a rabbit. He set the prey a few feet from her and retreated, waiting. An offering. Food. "Thank you," she said, the words sounding strange under the circumstances. The creature tilted its head again in that almost human gesture. Willow prepared the rabbit as simply as she could, using sharp stones she found in the clearing. She had no way to make fire, so she ate the raw meat, trying not to think too much about what she was doing. Survival demanded sacrifices. The following days settled into a strange pattern. The wolf guided her through the forest during what she assumed were daylight hours, leading her to sources of clean water, to clearings where she could rest safely. At night, he hunted and brought food. He never came too close, never touched her, but also never truly left her alone. It was a silent companion Willow couldn't explain. On the third day, she started talking to him. She didn't expect answers, but the silence was becoming unbearable. She told him about her life in the pack, about the mother she had lost, about the years of invisible servitude. The wolf listened attentively, his amber eyes fixed on her as if he understood every word. "They sent me here to die," she said at one point, her voice heavy with bitterness. "I was so insignificant that my death would simply be convenient." The wolf emitted a low sound, almost a moan. Willow looked at him, surprised. There was something in that sound that seemed like indignation. It was on the 5th day that she found the ruins. The wolf had led her along a different, older trail, with uneven stones emerging from the soil like the earth's bones. Willow noticed that he moved with more hesitation there, as if that place carried a special weight. The ruins appeared suddenly among the trees, stone walls overtaken by vegetation, structures once imposing now reduced to moss-covered skeletons. Willow stopped, observing the details with the eyes of someone beginning to understand that something very wrong had happened there. There were symbols carved into the stones that still stood, crests worn by time, yet still recognizable. 3 crossed claws beneath a crescent. Willow knew that symbol. She had seen it in ancient books in the Pack's library, in tapestries hidden in the corners of the Grand Hall. It was the crest of the old reign, from the era before Sterling Thorn, before everything she knew. The wolf stood beside her, observing the ruins with a stillness that seemed laden with memories. Willow looked at him, then at the symbols, then at him again. Something was beginning to connect in her mind, a truth that still had no definite form. "You know this place," she said, not as a question. The creature didn't move. Its eyes remained fixed on the ancient stones, and Willow could have sworn she saw pain in that animal gaze. Pain and something more. Longing, perhaps, or grief. She advanced among the ruins, touching the stones, trying to read the history written in fragments. Something important had been here, something the Pack had made sure to erase from collective memory. The structures spoke of order, of rituals, of a system that contradicted everything she'd heard about the old king. It wasn't a fortress of tyranny. It was a place of ceremonies, of honor, of traditions. The truth was beginning to emerge, but Willow still couldn't see its full form. All she knew was that the stories they told didn't match the stones beneath her fingers, and that the creature beside her wasn't what everyone thought. Night fell over the ruins, and Willow fell asleep with her head resting on a stone that had once been a throne. The wolf remained on guard, as always, his amber eyes glowing in the darkness like 2 small moons. And in the shadows, 20-year-old secrets waited to be uncovered. Willow awoke to the faint light of dawn filtering through the tree canopies. The ruins around her looked different under that soft light, less frightening, more melancholic. She sat up slowly, her muscles, protesting after another night sleeping on hard surfaces, and scanned for the wolf. He was exactly where he had been when she fell asleep, still as an ebony statue. Hunger gnawed at her stomach with sharp claws. As if reading her thoughts, the creature rose and disappeared among the trees with silent movements. Willow had already learned that he would return with food. While she waited, she decided to explore more of the ruins that had sheltered her sleep. The place was larger than it had seemed the night before. The structures extended over a considerable area, intertwined with the vegetation in an almost organic way. There were rooms whose walls still partially stood, corridors that led to underground chambers, stairs that climbed to long collapsed viewpoints. Willow walked among them carefully, touching each surface, absorbing every detail. In one of the smaller chambers she found fragments of tapestry. The fabric was almost completely deteriorated, but some colours still persisted in the less exposed edges. Dark red, gold, black. The colours of the old reign, she realised. The same colours the Pack had banned from their garments after the king's downfall. There were more symbols carved into the stone walls. Willow didn't recognise most of them, but some repeated frequently enough to suggest importance. One in particular caught her eye. A wolf with a crown, surrounded by stars. The symbol seemed protected in a niche, less worn than the others, as if someone had cared for it even after the place was abandoned. The sound of footsteps behind her made Willow turn quickly. The wolf was at the chamber entrance, watching her with those eyes that seemed to understand too much. There was something different in his posture now, a tension she hadn't seen before. When his eyes met the symbol of the crowned wolf, the creature emitted a low sound that could be a moan or a sigh. "This place was yours," Willow said softly, the truth finally taking shape in her mind. "You're not just a wolf living in the forest. You are. You were the king." The creature remained motionless for a long moment. Then, slowly, it tilted its head in a movement that was unmistakably an assent. Willow felt the air escape her lungs. The stories they told, about the tyrant who had gone mad and fled, about the monster that terrorized the forest, all of them were lies. What did they do to you? The wolf approached, stopping a few feet away. It was the closest he had come since he found her in the forest. Willow could see details in his fur that had previously gone unnoticed. Old scars beneath the black hairs, the way one of his ears had a small chip at the tip. Marks of past battles, of a life that was not merely savagery. He touched his muzzle to her hand gently, just for an instant. The contact was like an electric spark, sending waves of warmth up Willow's arm. There was something in that touch that transcended the physical, a connection she couldn't explain. "I will find out," she promised, her voice firm despite the tremor in her heart. "I'll find out what happened and tell the truth." The following days were dedicated to systematically exploring the ruins. Willow found more fragments of history hidden among the stones, records engraved on metal plaques, abandoned jewels with the symbols of the rain, even animal bones that seemed to have been sacrificed in ancient rituals. Each discovery added a piece to the puzzle, and the image that emerged was very different from the official narrative. The old king had not been a tyrant. The records spoke of justice, protection, laws that guaranteed equal rights to all pack members. There were mentions of a diverse council, of decisions made jointly, of a system that seemed almost democratic by the standards of that society. None of it matched the stories of madness and cruelty that Sterling Thorne had spread. On an especially cold afternoon, Willow found what appeared to be the ceremonial heart of the ruins. A circular courtyard surrounded by stone pillars, with an altar at its centre. The altar was covered in symbols, but one stood out. 3 crossed claws beneath a crescent, the same crest she had seen on the walls, but larger and more elaborate. The wolf had followed her there, but stopped at the courtyard entrance, refusing to advance. Willow looked at him, confused, then perceived the pain in his eyes. That place held too many heavy memories. "I'm sorry," she said, returning to where he stood. "You don't have to go in if you don't want to." The creature nudged its muzzle against her shoulder, a silent gesture of thanks. Willow allowed herself a moment of contact, feeling the warmth of his body through his fur, his slow, deep breathing against her skin. It was strange how she had grown accustomed to his presence, how she could no longer imagine being in the forest without his company. That night, as she sat beside a small fire she had finally managed to start, Willow thought about her life before the forest. She thought about the years of humiliation, of invisibility, of serving people who treated her as less than nothing. And she thought about Sterling Thorne, about his satisfied smile when he sentenced her to death, about the ease with which he discarded her. "He knew," she said aloud, looking at the wolf lying on the other side of the fire. "Sterling Thorne knew you were here. He knew and kept you trapped in this forest for 20 years. The creature raised its head, its eyes reflecting the flames. "He didn't send me here hoping I'd die," Willow continued, the pieces finally clicking into place. "He sent me here because he needed someone disposable, someone no one would look for. Someone to... For what?" The answer came with sudden clarity, to verify if the monster was still alive. The war pack hadn't sent expeditions into the forest for years, fearing the stories. Sterling Thorne needed to know if the threat still existed, and Willow was the perfect test. If she died, the monster was active. If she didn't die, well, he didn't expect her to survive anyway. "You are the proof," she said, anger rising in her chest. "You are the proof of what he did, of how he came to power. And as long as you exist, he will never be completely safe." The wolf stood up and walked to her, sitting beside her with a closeness he hadn't shown before. Willow reached out and touched his fur, feeling the tense muscles beneath her fingers. There was so much strength contained in that body, so much pain accumulated in 20 years of forced exile. "We're going to bring him down," she promised, her voice low and fierce. "I'll find a way to undo what he did. I'll tell the entire pack the truth. I'll show them who he truly is." The creature turned its head and stared at her. For a long moment they just looked at each other, human and wolf, 2 souls marked by injustices they had never asked for. Willow saw something change in those amber eyes, a hope that seemed to have been buried long ago, slowly emerging. "You're not alone anymore," she said, each word an oath, "and neither am I." The wolf rested its head on her shoulder, and Willow let the tears stream silently. They weren't tears of sadness, but of something more complex, of connection, of purpose, of a determination that grew in her chest like fire. She had come to that forest expecting death. Instead, she had found a truth that could change everything, and a companion who, even in his cursed form, demonstrated more humanity than anyone she had known in the pack. The following weeks passed at a different pace. Willow no longer counted the days as a prisoner awaiting an end, but as a scholar unravelling a mystery. Every stone in the ruins had a story to tell. Every record found added a layer to the truth she was reconstructing. The King's Journal revealed details that made the betrayal even more painful. Sterling Thorn had not acted alone. There were mentions of an elder, a healer who practiced forbidden arts, who had provided the curse that transformed the king into a wolf. Her name appeared on the final pages, written with the hesitation of one who still didn't want to believe in the treachery. Ilara. Willow knew that name. Ilara was a legendary figure in the pack, a healer who had died mysteriously a few months after the king's downfall. Or at least, that's what the stories told. Now she wondered if the death had been real or just another layer of lies. "We need to find information about Ilara," she told the wolf on a grey morning. "If she created the curse, there must be a way to undo it." The creature looked at her with something that seemed like doubt. 20 years was a long time. Any existing clues might have been lost, along with the ruins of the old reign. But Willow was not willing to give up. She explored every corner of the ruins she hadn't yet examined, every hidden chamber, every forgotten passage. It was on a particularly damp afternoon that she found what she was looking for. A small room behind a false wall, completely preserved from time. The place was clearly a ritual site. There were circles carved into the stone floor, symbols Willow didn't recognize, glass vials lined on stone shelves. And in the centre on a pedestal there was a book. The book was bound in dark leather, its pages protected by some magic that kept them intact despite the years. Willow opened it with trembling hands and found what appeared to be a grimoire, a record of spells and rituals written in the same handwriting as the King's Journal. This wasn't Ilara's, she realised, leafing through the pages. This was the King's. He studied the ancient arts. The wolf approached, his eyes fixed on the book with an intensity that confirmed her suspicions. Here were records of years of study, attempts to understand the powers that governed his people, knowledge that Sterling Thorn clearly didn't want anyone to discover. Willow spent hours deciphering the pages until she found a section that made her heart stop. Shape-shifting curses, it was written at the top of the page, followed by a detailed description of how such spells worked and, more importantly, how they could be undone. "Every transformation curse has an anchor," she read aloud. "An object, a person, or a place that keeps the spell active. Destroying the anchor weakens the curse but does not completely undo it. To reverse a forced transformation, the victim must be recognized in their true form by someone of pure blood and sincere heart, before believing witnesses." She looked at the wolf, processing the words. "Someone needs to recognize you as king," she said slowly. "Not just know, but truly believe before the entire pack. And the anchor of the curse needs to be found and destroyed." The wolf emitted a low sound, almost a sigh. These were daunting conditions. The entire pack believed he was a monster, and the anchor could be anything, any object Ilara had used 20 years ago. "Ethan," Willow said suddenly, an idea forming. "Ethan served the king. He hesitated when he saw you, almost recognized you. If we can convince him completely, if he can bear witness before others..." It was a fragile plan, full of uncertainties, but it was the only one she had. Willow put the grimoire away with the journal, two pieces of evidence that could change everything if used correctly. The following days were dedicated to preparation. Willow needed to return to the pack, but not as the disposable girl they had, sent to die. She needed to return with proof, with allies, with a plan that could work even against Sterling Thorn's power. The wolf helped her find a safe route to the edge of the forest, a path that passed through less guarded territories. They spent hours studying the pack's patrol patterns, identifying the moments when it would be safest to approach. On one of those planning nights, sitting under the stars, they could finally see through a clearing. Willow felt the magnitude of what they were trying to do weigh heavily on her shoulders. She was an orphan with no standing, no power, no reason for anyone to listen to her. And she was planning to topple the most powerful man she knew. "Sometimes I wonder if this is madness," she confessed, looking at the sky. "If I'm deluding myself into thinking I can make a difference." The wolf approached, lying beside her with his warm body against hers. It was the closest they got, in these moments of vulnerability. Willow allowed herself to lean into him, absorbing the comfort of his presence. "But then I think of you," she continued, her voice soft. "I think of 20 years, alone in this forest, 20 years paying for a crime you didn't commit. And I know I can't just accept it. I can't look at this injustice and pretend it doesn't exist." The wolf turned its head and stared at her. In that gaze held something Willow hadn't seen so clearly before. Gratitude mixed with something deeper, something that made her heart quicken in a way she didn't want to examine too closely. "When you become human again," she said, the words escaping before she could hold them back, "will you remember all this? Remember me?" The creature moved, positioning, its muzzle against her forehead in a gesture of surprising intimacy. It was an answer that needed no words. "Yes," it said. "Yes, I will remember. Yes, you matter." Willow closed her eyes and let a tear escape. She didn't know when she had started to care for him this way, when the gratitude for being spared had transformed into something more intense. She only knew that the idea of returning him to the human world brought both joy and pain. Because as king, he would have responsibilities, expectations, possibly a mate the pack would consider suitable. And she would always be the orphan who slept in barns. "This is so complicated," she murmured against his fur. The wolf emitted a sound that almost sounded like a laugh. Willow couldn't help but smile. The next day, something unexpected happened. As they explored the area around the ruins, they found a young man collapsed among the trees. He was injured, unconscious, wearing the pack's colours. Willow hesitated, instinctively wary, but the wolf approached first and sniffed the air around the boy. "Do you know him?" she asked. The creature nodded once, then indicated with its muzzle that she should approach. Willow obeyed, kneeling beside the young man to examine his injuries. There was a deep gash in his side, as if he had been attacked by some forest animal, and several smaller scratches across his body. She used the skills her mother had taught her, knowledge of herbs and salves she never imagined using under these circumstances. The young man groaned when she cleaned the wound, but didn't fully awaken. Willow struggled to drag him to one of the more sheltered structures of the ruins where she could care for him properly. When the boy finally opened his eyes hours later, his first instinct was panic. He tried to get up, searching for a weapon he didn't have, his eyes wide with fear. "Easy," Willow said, keeping her distance. "You're safe. I took care of your injuries." The young man looked at her with confusion. "You're Willow? The girl they sent to the forest?" "That's me. How are you still alive? The monster." "He's not a monster," she interrupted, her voice firm. "And you'll find that out for yourself, if you let me explain." The boy's name was Noah, and he was 18. He had entered the forest fleeing in a Unjust punishment imposed by Sterling Thorne, preferring to risk the legendary monster than face the Alpha's cruelty. Willow listened to his story with a heavy heart, recognizing in it echoes of her own experience. Sterling Thorne is getting more and more paranoid, Noah recounted, his voice weak but determined. Since the warriors returned, telling about the creature that didn't kill them, he's been imprisoning anyone who questions his orders. My crime was asking why we didn't try to make peace with the wolf instead of attacking him. Willow exchanged a glance with the wolf's shadow who watched from afar. What if I told you the wolf was the old king? She asked carefully. That Sterling Thorne betrayed him and transformed him into this 20 years ago. Noah stared at her for a long moment. Then, to her surprise, he nodded. My grandmother always said the stories about the tyrant didn't match the ancient records, he said. She served in the royal compound before the downfall. She said the king was just kind, that something very wrong had happened for him to disappear that way. Willow felt hope swell in her chest. Perhaps she wasn't as alone as she thought. Then, help me, she asked. Help me bring the truth back. Noah recovered over the course of a week, a time Willow used to completely convince him of the truth about the wolf. She showed him the journal, the grimoire, the evidence carved into the stones of the ruins. Each piece of the puzzle she presented made the boy's eyes widen a little more, until no room for doubt remained. My grandmother was right, he murmured one afternoon, observing the wolf resting a few feet away. The king was never a tyrant. He was betrayed by the man who now governs. Us, Willow nodded, feeling the weight of the responsibility she carried. And now, we need to make the entire pack see what you've seen. But for that, we need more allies. Ethan seemed shaken when he left. If we can reach him. Noah knew the secret paths that led to the settlement, the points where vigilance was laxer. Together, they devised a plan to make contact with people who might be willing to listen. Noah's grandmother, who kept memories of the old reign. Some older warriors who had served the true king. Anyone who might have doubts about the official version of the story. The wolf resisted the idea of Willow returning to the pack. He paced restlessly around her, blocking her path whenever she tried to leave, his amber eyes full of a concern that needed no words to be understood. I have to do this, she said, kneeling before him. You know it's the only way. If I stay here, nothing will change. Sterling Thorne will remain in power, and you'll stay trapped in this form forever. The wolf rested his forehead against hers, a gesture that had become familiar between them. Willow closed her eyes, feeling his warmth, the texture of his fur, his slow breath against her skin. I'll come back, she promised. I'll always come back for you. The first foray into the pack was made in the dead of night. Willow and Noah slipped through the shadows to his grandmother's cabin, an elder named Evelyn who lived on the outskirts of the settlement. The old woman nearly fainted at the sight of her grandson, whom she thought she'd lost to the forest, but her surprise turned to determination when she heard what they had to say. I knew it, Evelyn repeated, tears streaming down, her wrinkled cheeks. I always knew something was wrong. The king was a good, just man. The story Sterling Thorne told never made sense to anyone who truly knew him. She agreed to help. In the following days, using the silent communication channels that existed among the older members of the pack, Evelyn planted the seeds of doubt, questions whispered in elder meetings, memories shared in seemingly innocent conversations, fragments of truth planted on fertile ground. Willow returned to the forest between each mission, reporting progress to the wolf who waited for her with barely disguised anxiety. The creature seemed more restless each day, as if sensing the approach of something inevitable. Sometimes Willow caught him looking at his own paws with an expression that looked like frustration, almost anger. It's hard for you, isn't it? She asked on one of those nights. Knowing things are happening and not being able to participate directly. The wolf stared at her with those eyes that said more than any words could express. Willow reached out and stroked his face, feeling his muscles relax under her touch. Soon, she said. Soon you'll be able to act for yourself. I promise. The decisive moment. came sooner than they expected. Ethan, the warrior Willow had confronted in the ruins, appeared at the forest's edge on a cold pre-dawn. Alone, unarmed, with deep circles under his eyes that betrayed sleepless nights. "I need to talk to you," he said when Willow emerged from the shadows. "I need to see the creature again." She led him to where the wolf waited, observing Ethan's reaction closely. The warrior fell to his knees at the sight of the creature, his whole body trembling. "I served you," he said, his voice cracking. "When I was young, I served in the royal compound. I remember your gaze, those eyes. I should have recognized you sooner." The wolf approached slowly, stopping before the kneeling man. For a long moment they just looked at each other, human and beast, past and present colliding in silence. "Sterling Thorne knew," Ethan continued, the words gushing as if a dam had broken. "He always knew. I found hidden records in his chambers, documents that prove he planned everything. The curse, the lie about tyranny, everything. And there's more. He keeps an object locked in a safe, protected as if it were the most valuable thing in the world. A medallion with the symbol of the ancient rain." Willow felt her heart quicken. "The anchor," she said. "It must be the anchor of the curse." Ethan looked at her with confusion, and she quickly explained what she had discovered in the grimoire. The warrior's eyes widened with understanding. "If we destroy the medallion, the curse weakens, and if the king is recognized in his true identity before believing witnesses—" "He returns," Ethan completed, his voice laden with a hope that seemed almost painful. The plan began to take concrete shape. Ethan had access to Sterling Thorne's chambers. He could create a diversion that would allow Willow to enter and retrieve the medallion. Evelyn and the other elders could gather those who were already beginning to question the Alpha. And Noah knew the ways to bring the wolf to the heart of the settlement undetected. It was risky. A single mistake could mean death for all of them, but it was also the only real chance they had. "The Full Moon Festival," Evelyn suggested when they met to finalize the details. "It's in 3 days. The entire pack will be gathered in the Grand Hall. If we're going to expose Sterling Thorne, this is the moment." Willow looked at the wolf, who had remained in the shadows throughout the meeting. He nodded once, an almost imperceptible movement that carried the weight of 20 years of waiting. "Then that's it," she said, her voice firm despite the fear running in her veins. "In 3 days, we end this." The days that followed were the longest of Willow's life. She moved between the forest and the settlement, coordinating the final details, ensuring that every piece was in place. Nervousness was a constant ache in her chest, a tension that didn't leave her even when she slept. On the eve of the festival, she sat beside the wolf in the ruins that had become their refuge. The moon rose in the sky, almost full, illuminating the ancient stones with a silvery light that seemed otherworldly. "Tomorrow everything changes," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "One way or another." The wolf approached, resting his head in her lap. Willow automatically stroked him, her fingers running through the fur that had become so familiar. "I wish I could see you," she confessed. "See you as you were before. Know what your face was like, your voice. Know if you would feel for me what I feel for you." The words escaped before she could hold them back, truths she had been avoiding since she realized the depth of her feelings. The wolf raised his head and stared at her, those amber eyes glowing with an intensity that made the air vanish from her lungs. "I know it's madness," she continued, unable to stop now that she had started. "I'm an orphan with nothing. You are a king. It makes no sense. It shouldn't make sense. But I look at you and I can't help it." The wolf moved, positioning himself so their faces were close. Willow could feel the warmth of his breath, see every detail of those eyes that seemed to contain entire universes. "No matter what happens tomorrow," she said, her voice trembling, "I needed you to know that I see you, not as a monster, not as a king, as you." and I would choose this again, even knowing everything I know now. The wolf nudged its muzzle against her cheek, a soft touch that was almost a kiss. Willow closed her eyes and let the tears fall, knowing that tomorrow would bring answers that could change everything or destroy everything. That night, she slept beside him, their bodies intertwined in a way that defied the barriers between species, between forms. And when the sun rose, bringing the day that would decide the future of all of them, Willow awoke with an iron determination in her heart. It was time to bring the truth to light. The grand hall was packed when the moon began to rise in the sky. The entire pack had gathered for the festival, wearing their best clothes, expecting to celebrate as they did every year. Torches lit the stone walls, casting dancing shadows that seemed to guard secrets. In the centre of the hall, in his raised chair, Sterling Thorn watched his people with the satisfaction of one who believes he has absolute control. Willow was hidden in the shadows near the back entrance, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it wanted to escape her chest. She could see Ethan across the hall, strategically positioned near Sterling Thorn's chambers. Evelyn and the other elders were scattered throughout the crowd, ready to act when the signal was given. And deep in the forest, Noah guided the wolf along secret paths towards the settlement. Everything was in place. Now all that remained was to act. The signal came when Sterling Thorn stood up to give his traditional speech. Ethan feigned illness and discreetly withdrew, walking towards the Alpha's chambers as if seeking fresh air. Willow waited until he disappeared from sight, then moved. The corridors of the lodge were almost empty, with most of the guards focused in the main hall. Willow slipped through the shadows she knew so well from her years as a servant, using the invisibility that had always been her curse as a weapon. She found Ethan waiting at the door of Sterling Thorn's chambers, already working on the lock. "Quick," he whispered. "We don't have much time." The door yielded with a soft click. The interior of the chambers was exactly as Willow expected. Luxurious, orderly, full of symbols of power. But she had no time to observe. Her eyes sought the safe Ethan had described, finding it in a corner protected by heavy curtains. Opening the safe took precious minutes that felt like hours. When she finally succeeded, Willow found exactly what she was looking for. A silver medallion with the symbol of the 3 crossed claws beneath a crescent, identical to those she had seen in the ruins. But unlike the others, this one pulsed with a strange, almost living energy that made her fingers tingle when she touched it. "The anchor," she whispered, closing her fingers around the object. A scream echoed down the corridor, making her blood run cold. Someone had seen them. Someone was alerting the guards. "Run!" Ethan pushed her towards a side exit. "Go to the hall. I'll hold them here." Willow had no time to argue. She ran through the corridors as she had never run before, the medallion clutched in her hand, the sound of pursuit echoing behind her. When she finally burst into the grand hall through the back doors, the entire pack turned to look at her. The silence that fell was absolute. Willow was there, the girl who should have been dead, standing in the center of all attention with something gleaming in her hand. Sterling Thorn rose from his chair, his face contorted in a fury she had never seen. "Seize her!" he ordered, his voice cutting the air like a whip. Guards advanced, but before they could reach her, the main doors of the hall burst inward, and there, silhouetted against the full moon's light, stood the wolf. The entire pack recoiled in panic. Screams echoed through the stone walls, people trying to flee, others paralyzed with terror. But Willow didn't move. She remained exactly where she was, looking at the creature she had learned to love. "Don't be afraid," her voice echoed through the hall, surprisingly firm. "He's not what you think. He's not a monster. He is the true king." The silence that followed was different. It wasn't fear, it was confusion. Willow seized the moment. "Sterling Thorn lied to you for 20 years. She held up the medallion for everyone to see. "He betrayed the legitimate king. used forbidden magic to transform him into this, and then spread lies of tyranny to justify his coup. I have proof. The king's own journal, records of the conspiracy, and this, she pointed to the medallion, the anchor of the curse that keeps him trapped in this form. Lies, Sterling Thorne advanced, his face red with rage. This girl is a traitor, a lunatic who spent too much time in the forest. Don't believe a word she says. But Willow saw the doubt in the faces around her. She saw Evelyn and the other elders positioning themselves. She saw warriors who had served the old king exchanging meaningful glances. The seed they had planted was germinating. "Ethan," she called, "tell them what you found." The warrior emerged from a side door, injured but standing, carrying the documents he had retrieved from Sterling Thorne's chambers. "It's true," he said, his voice echoing through the silent hall. "I found records of the conspiracy, written by Sterling Thorne himself. He planned everything, from the curse to the lies he told afterward. The king was never a tyrant. Sterling Thorne is the one who has always been the traitor." The chaos that followed was intense but brief. Willow used the distraction to approach the wolf, the medallion still clutched in her hand. She knew what she needed to do. "I recognize you," she said, her voice clear despite the confusion around her. "I recognize you not as a monster, not as a beast. I recognize you as the true alpha of this pack, the legitimate king who was betrayed and silenced. I see. You. I believe in you." She raised the medallion and hurled it to the ground with all her might. The metal shattered against the stone, and a wave of energy exploded through the hall, making everyone recoil. And then, before the entire pack, the wolf began to change. The transformation was slow, almost painful to watch, bones realigning, muscles reforming, fur giving way to skin. Willow watched with tears streaming down her face as the creature she loved became something different, something she had never seen but recognized instantly. The man who emerged from the transformation was tall, with black hair like the wolf's fur and eyes of the same golden amber she knew so well. His face bore the lines of 20 years of suffering, but also a strength, a dignity that no time could erase. He stood naked, vulnerable, yet with the bearing of one born to lead. The silence in the hall was absolute. No one dared breathe. "My name is Caleb." His voice was rough from disuse, but carried undeniable authority. "And I am the legitimate alpha of this pack." Evelyn was the first to kneel. Then Ethan, then Noah, then the other elders, one by one. Pack members recognized the truth before them. Bowing before the king they believed they had lost forever. Sterling Thorne tried to flee, but warriors surrounded him before he could take 2 steps. The man who had governed through lies for 2 decades was now cornered, his mask of power shattered as completely as the medallion on the floor. "You destroyed my life," Caleb said, advancing towards the traitor with slow, deliberate steps. "You destroyed my family, my reign, my people. You condemned me to 20 years of solitude and silence." Sterling Thorne fell to his knees, all his arrogance evaporated. "Mercy," he pleaded, his voice trembling. "Please, mercy." Caleb stopped before him, his expression unreadable. For a long moment the entire hall held its breath, awaiting judgment. "Mercy," the king repeated, the word laden with bitter irony. "Do you know that word? Did you show it when you transformed me into a beast? When you left me wandering the forest for 2 decades? He turned, stepping away from the kneeling man. "But I am not you," Caleb declared, his voice echoing through the hall. "Seize him. He will be judged by the council, as the law commands. True justice, not revenge." Guards dragged Sterling Thorne out, his protests echoing down the corridors until they were swallowed by the distance. And then, finally, Caleb turned to Willow. She was still standing in the same spot, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it wanted to escape. He was different from what she had imagined, and at the same time exactly the same. The eyes were the same, The soul was the same. Willow, he said her name as if it were a prayer. She couldn't answer. Her legs gave out beneath her. All the tension of the past, weeks finally taking its toll. But before she could fall, strong arms caught her. "I've got you," Caleb whispered against her hair. "I'll always have you." Willow allowed herself to collapse into his arms, crying with relief, exhaustion, a joy so intense it almost hurt. Around them the pack watched in silence, witnessing the moment that redefined everything they knew. "You saved me," Caleb said, his hands stroking her face with a tenderness that contrasted with the strength of his body. "You saw beyond the beast, beyond the stories, beyond everything. You saw me." "I saw you," she replied. Her voice choked. "And I saw someone worth saving." He smiled, his first true smile in 20 years, and Willow's eyes filled with tears again at the beauty of that expression. "The pack will need time to adapt," Caleb said, looking around the packed hall. "And I have much work ahead to rebuild what was destroyed." Willow nodded, preparing to pull away. Of course he had responsibilities. Of course she needed to give him space, but Caleb didn't let go. "I want you by my side," he said, his voice firm and clear for all to hear. "Not as a servant, not as an ally, as my companion, my queen." The hall erupted in murmurs, but Willow heard none of them. All she could see was the man before her, the king who had been a wolf, the heart she had learned to love in his most vulnerable form. "Yes," she said, the word escaping as a whisper. Caleb kissed her before the entire pack, sealing not just a promise between two hearts, but the beginning of a new era for all of them. The past of lies had been shattered along with the medallion, the future, uncertain but full possibilities stretched before them, like a forest waiting to be explored. That night, under the full moon that had witnessed so many transformations, Willow finally understood that some destinies are written in the stars. She had come to that forest expecting death and found something infinitely more valuable: truth, justice, and a love that transcended all the barriers the world had tried to place between them. And as the first rays of sunlight began to paint the horizon golden, illuminating a kingdom ready for rebirth, Willow knew that this was just the beginning. The true reign, finally, was about to begin.